The following teaching is by Jim Pugh through the ministry of God is Government. If you have never listened to one of our Bridge of Truth podcasts and wish to see all the topics taught through this Bridge of Truth ministry, please go to www.godisgovernment.com to find the inventory of Bridge of Truth podcasts. Now, welcome Jim Pugh as he presents another historical study of truth from history, Bible scripture, or current events.
Point of No Return, The New Frontier. In 1989, Jim Marrs authored an article titled Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy. He stated, Kennedy's fate was sealed in June 1963 when he authorized the issuance of more than $4 billion in United States notes by his Treasury Department in an attempt to circumvent the high interest rate usury of the private Federal Reserve international banker crowd. The wife of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was conveniently gunned down by Jack Ruby before Ruby himself was shot, told author A.J. Weberman in 1994, "The answer to the Kennedy assassination is with the Federal Reserve Bank. Don't underestimate that. It's wrong to blame it on Angleton and the CIA per se only. This is only one finger on the same hand. The people who supply the money are above the CIA." The new frontier was illusionary. The promised change in the system never occurred. And under John F. Kennedy, the key cabinet positions remained occupied by officials from the Council on Foreign Relations. Dean Rusk, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, became Secretary of State. C. Douglas Dillon, the future CFR vice chairman and former member of the Eisenhower cabinet, became Secretary of the Treasury. And Robert Strange McNamara, Ford Motor Company president and future president of the World Bank, became Secretary of Defense. Other CFR appointees included McGeorge Bundy as National Security Advisor, Walt Rostow as Deputy National Security Advisor, John McCone as CIA Director, Roswell Gilpatrick as Deputy Secretary of Defense, Paul Nietzsche as Assistant Secretary of Defense, Henry Fowler as Undersecretary of the Treasury, George Ball as Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs, Avril Harriman as Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Affairs, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. and Jerome Wiesner as Special Assistants to the President, and John J. McCloy, former President of the World Bank and Chairman of the CFR, as Chief of the U.S. Department Administration. The Kennedy record was characterized by political embarrassment and executive indecision. He launched the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba under a group of 1,400 Cuban expatriates and, at the last minute, failed to provide the four with necessary air support, thereby dooming the mission to failure. Pinned on the beach, the invaders surrendered after less than a day of battle. 114 were killed and 1,110 were placed in a prison camp. To resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy did not confront Nikita Khrushchev with steadfast resolve. Instead, he acquiesced to the Soviet premier's demand that the United States remove all of its intermediate-range missile bases in England, Italy, and Turkey. As a further concession, Kennedy pledged that he would never again launch an invasion against Cuba and confiscated the guns and boats of all anti-Castro militants in the United States. Under Kennedy's 3-year watch, the CIA launched 163 covert operations, only 7 fewer than similar undertakings under the Wright years of Eisenhower. Several of these undertakings took place in Vietnam, including the ouster of South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem and the resettlement of thousands of villagers at gunpoint in barbed wire enclosed encampments. Such actions created the instability that would lead to the Vietnam War. Other ops occurred in Latin America, including the Dominican Republic, where the CIA arranged the assassination of President Rafael Trujillo. Trujillo was replaced by the democratically elected Juan Bosch, whom the agency ousted from office so that the country could be run by a military junta. Kennedy extended the ability to perpetuate political disasters to Central Africa. When the province of Katanga, under the leadership of Moise Tshombe, seceded from the Congo and declared independence, the United Nations, supported by the Kennedy administration, launched airstrikes on Elizabethville, the capital of Katanga, followed by a full-scale invasion by UN peacekeeping forces. The peacekeepers went on a wild rampage, murdering hundreds of natives, raping their women, and confiscating their belongings. But when 46 physicians from Katanga turned to the White House for intercession, Kennedy opted to ignore their plea. John F. Kennedy was a socialist who belonged to the Fabian Society, an internationalist who sanctioned the surrender of all arms, including nukes, to the United Nations, and a supporter of the IMF World Bank. On September 30th, 1963, he explained the concept of global socialism and the redistribution of wealth in the following glowing terms. 20 years ago, when the architects of these institutions met to design an international banking structure, the economic life of the world was paralyzed in overwhelming and even alarming measure on the United States. 60% of the fold reserves of the world were here in the United States. There was a need for redistribution of the financial resources of the world, and there was an equal need to organize a flow of capital to the impoverished countries of the world. All this has come about. It did not come about by chance, but by conscious and deliberate and responsible planning. But he made enemies, including the Capos F. America's leading mafia families, who had lost their holdings in Cuba, the CIA for his failure to ensure the success of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and, last but not least, the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller animosity arose from Kennedy's Alliance for Progress, which he launched on March 31st, 1961. This program provided massive amounts of foreign aid to Latin America. The $1.4 billion in annual aid was supposed to stimulate economic growth, redistribute wealth, and promote democratic governments. The Bolivian and Chilean governments were encouraged to use their share of the aid to purchase equipment for the nationalization of mines throughout the country, including the very lucrative tin, silver, and copper mines owned by the Rockefellers. In Peru and Venezuela, the money was used to prop up state-run oil companies, much to the detriment of Standard Oil. This program, which threatened the enormous interest of the House of Rockefeller south of the border, was followed by Kennedy's mishandling of the Bay of Pigs invasion, which resulted in Castro expropriating the Standard Oil refinery in Cuba and other Rockefeller holdings. In promoting the Alliance for Progress, Kennedy said he was sick of the U.S. government acting as the representative of private business, including the interests of the Rockefellers. He added that his administration no longer would prop up tin-horn dictators and corrupt regimes in countries like Chile, where American copper companies, including the Rockefeller-owned Anaconda Copper, control about 8% of all the foreign exchange. We wouldn't stand for it here, and there's no reason they should stand for it. Regarding JFK and A. Rockefellers, David Talbot writes, he, Kennedy, fully appreciated that the Rockefellers held a unique place in the pantheon of American power, one rooted not so much within the democratic system as within what scholars would later refer to as the deep state, that subterranean network of financial intelligence and military interests that guided national policy, no matter who occupied the White House. The Kennedys had risen from saloon keepers and ward heelers to the top of American politics, but they were still overshadowed by the imperial power of the Rockefellers. Shortly after launching his Latin American program, Kennedy appeared before the American Newspaper Publishers Association to deliver a speech that may have sealed his fate. In a veiled reference to the House of Rockefeller and the money cartel, he spoke of a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that sought to rule the world. The speech would have caused the Rockefeller brothers, David, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, and John D. III to blanch with repressed outrage, as evidence in the following excerpts. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, and infiltration instead of invasion, and subversion instead of elections, and intimidation instead of free choice, or guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed. And finally, there was the matter of Executive Order number 11,110, by which Kennedy instructed the Treasury Department rather than the Federal Reserve to issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver, or silver dollars in the Treasury. This means that for every ounce of silver in the U.S. Treasury's vault, the government could introduce new money with actual value into circulation. In compliance with this order, U.S. notes in the amount of $4,292,893,815 were produced in $2 and $5 denominations. This was not fiat money, it was paper currency with actual value. And since it was issued by the government rather than the Fed, the money came interest-free. An event of alarming proportions had taken place. Kennedy, with one stroke of the pen, threatened to put the Federal Reserve out of business. The Fed no longer could manipulate the economy by producing and withholding money. It no longer could create depression or prosperity. It no longer could manufacture money from nothing. And the money cartel, including the House of Rockefeller, no longer could exact billions in interest for lending the money to pay off the national debt. When Kennedy actually minted non-debt money that does not bear the mark of the Federal Reserve, when he dared to actually exercise the leadership authority granted to him by the U.S. Constitution, according to Colonel James Gritz, he had prepared his own death warrant. It was time for him to go. 1 week after Kennedy's brains were blown away in broad daylight, Lyndon B. Johnson established a commission under Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren to examine the facts of the assignation and to prepare a comprehensive report. Members of the 8-man commission included Allen Dulles, the former head of the CIA who had been fired by Kennedy, and John McCloy, the former president of both the World Bank and Chase Manhattan. The 900-page investigative report ruled that Kennedy had been killed by a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. But it failed to provide anything from Oswald's past that could serve as a motive for the crime. The suspect, indeed, had publicly proclaimed his admiration of the president on numerous occasions. The report also ignored the fact that Oswald, unlike single assassins with a cause, adamantly denied his guilt and claimed that he was a patsy. The lesson was learned. In the wake of the killing, no more silver certificates were issued, and no other American president dared to defy the Fed and its secret shareholders. Breaking for the protocol of education of history, we will bring into this podcast current information about this history. What we know is the assassination of Kennedy was the cover-up of the CIA. He was not killed by a lone assassin, but multiple gunmen, and it was a planned event that was approved by Lyndon B. Johnson. The assassination was coordinated by Papa Bush with the help of the Louisiana Mafia. All that said, to correct some of history and lead into where we have lived the last 10 years underneath a continuity of government controlled by the U.S. military, with Donald J. Trump as the commander-in-chief to finish what Kennedy tried to do. Soon the world will be free from the tyranny it was put into because of elite businessmen that had power over the money supply, thereby control over the world.
You have been listening to Bridge of Truth, brought to you by biblical teacher and author Jim Pugh with God is Government. For free access to all of Jim Pugh's Bridge of Truth podcast, please go to www.godisgovernment.com. Distribution of the Bridge of Truth and all other teachings are available for worldwide distribution. Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of Bridge of Truth.